Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to A Real Point of View. I'm your host, Greg Morgan, and I'm the Real Movie Guy on Twitter and also on Facebook fan pages. And we are film critics here. And let me introduce you to two of my cohorts, film critic, Miss Karen D, and she is the movie maven. And then I have Mr. Stephen C, and he's the man who doesn't pick bad movies. So we
Allegedly.
are your critics for the
Oh
evening
my
to
God.
talk about movies tonight. And tonight's subject is a continuing subject. We're doing movies up to 2017, and we're going the last 50 years of film, so each decade. So we've made our way up to 1997. And so in 1997, some really, really good movies came out. So we're going to try to talk to you about a few of them. We'll have probably like 3 or 4 each, more or less, and maybe some honorable mention movies. But definitely want to talk about some movies. Each one of us talk about some movies and what we thought about it, in hopes that you'll take the opportunity and go out and take a look at them. So the movies that I picked.
Well, Greg,
Rolling.
before you get started with the movies, could
Okay,
I?
I'm not going to get things rolling, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to stop.
Oh, I'm sorry, but usually I set the stage about what was going on in the world in 1997 before we get started on the movies.
Ladies and gentlemen, introduce
I refuse.
again. Steve refuses. Good.
Okay.
You know what? You refuse, Steve. Let's let Karen do it.
Well, I just kind of like to set the stage for what was happening in the world. And 1997 was a very eventful year, and there were a lot of sort of premonitions, or not premonitions, but sort of icons for things that were going to continue to happen. In 1997, the president of the United States was Bill Clinton. The vice president was Al Gore. And Clinton was starting a very challenging second term for 2 reasons. 1, the Congress was completely Republican and he was a Democratic president. 2, there were rumblings of impeachment that were beginning in 1997. The actual articles of impeachment would be set forth in 1998, but that train got started on the tracks in 1997. There were a lot of indications of terrorism. I mean, we think in the United States of our country losing its quote unquote innocence in that regard because of the attacks of 9/11. But there were many indications of encroaching terrorism before that. The CIA was attacked. The World Trade Center had suffered a bombing by 1997, and the person who was charged with that event was tried and found guilty in 1997. The Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building had been blown up in 1995, and Timothy McVeigh had been found guilty of that crime in 1997. On the other hand, Tiger Woods won his first Masters tournament, was the youngest golfer ever to win a Masters. And Mike Tyson bit off Evander Holyfield's ear that year in a fight.
I paid for that fight.
Microsoft, this will seem a little ironic, but Microsoft was on top of the world in 1997, and Windows was the only operating system that anybody cared about. Apple was in major financial trouble, and Steve Jobs returned to run Apple in 1997 after the failed stewardship of, I can't remember the guy who headed. Steve Jobs was fired, another man was brought in, he was head of Pepsi, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but they sent him packing. Steve Jobs was brought back to run Apple, and at that time, Microsoft had a 10% stake in the Apple Corporation, and Microsoft was the most valuable company in the world. Great Britain handed Hong Kong back to China that year, and bird flu was in the news. Especially in Asia, many birds were killed to keep bird flu from sort of becoming a human problem. Madeleine Albright became the first female Secretary of State ever in United States history. The Lion King debuted on Broadway in 1997 and is still on Broadway 20 years later. Princess Diana was killed that year in a car crash in Paris, France. Titanic was the top grossing film of 1997, and The English Patient won for Best Motion Picture. O.J. Simpson was found liable for wrongful death by a civil jury. Remember, he had been found innocent of the crime of murder. Dolly the sheep was cloned in the UK, and the first Harry Potter book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, was published in the UK in 1997. Harry Potter would be published the following year in the United States. And that's the way it was. And that's the way it was.
I was 11.
We're not getting into that.
Me too. I was 11 also.
About 20 times over.
I had just moved to Madison, Tennessee, and was starting school at Good Pasture Christian School.
I was with Steve.
You were 11 about 20 times over by then, Mr. Man.
I was?
Yes, you were.
What is this? What is this?
Oh,
I don't even know what my fingers are doing.
I have no idea.
You know what was really good about 1997? Movies.
Really? I think
There
so
were
too.
some really good movies.
I agree with you, Steve. There were some great movies back then.
One thing I will mention just before I get, and this was that, if you may not remember this, or maybe some people will remember this, but everybody in 1997, we would call this a meme now, but the favorite thing that everybody was saying was, "You had me at hello." Guess why? Because Jerry Maguire came out in 1997, and "You had me at hello" was like one of the best lines ever to come out of that movie.
It was the best line to come out of that movie. Right behind it was "Show me the money."
Right, and they were also saying "Show me the money."
Show me the money. Cuba Gooding Jr. Show me the money.
Yes, everybody was saying that too.
Very much so. Very popular movie.
It was.
Well, why don't we talk about some more popular movies of the time? So
it's kind of what we're here for.
Say again?
I said that's kind of what we're here for.
I think so. Well, just to get the ball rolling here, the movies that I picked for tonight are The Game, Good Will Hunting, and Air Force One. So what movies did you pick, Steve? Steve? Did we lose Steve again? Nope. He refused to tell us. Steve, can you hear us?
No. Try again.
Steve, can you hear us?
For some reason it cut out. I'm here now. What's up? What are we doing? What's going on? Let me do this.
What movies did you pick, man?
I picked Murder at 1600 with Wesley Snipes, Diane Lane, Dennis Miller, who was hugely popular at the time. And I chose Liar Liar, one of my favorite comedians, and Jim Carrey, and an ensemble cast to go with him. And then I chose... Yeah, we'll go with that one. I chose The Fifth Element. We're going to go with The Fifth Element.
All right, sounds like a plan.
Debating between that and Volcano, Tommy Lee Jones, Bruce Willis, other people, Mila Jovovich. I mean, when you look at casting for The Fifth Element versus Volcano, you could see where they were kind of throwing money.
Very much so. So, Karen, what did you pick?
My three films are Eve's Bayou, Love Jones, and Prefontaine.
Okay, so that's a pretty good mixture of different types of movies, and we get a comedy in there too, and we get some I guess athletics in there too at Prefontaine, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, why don't we get started with? Why don't you start us out, Karen?
Oh, I knew you were going to call my name.
Ladies first.
Ladies first.
Well,
thanks for the backup.
I assume we're going to do a round robin, so I'll just talk about my first film.
All right.
My first film that I'd like to talk about is Prefontaine. And this movie, I really enjoyed this movie, and I remember seeing it when it came out. This may be hard for some people out there to believe, but Jared Leto, who, you know, seemed to just explode on the screen after his incredible turn in the Dallas Buyers Club, starred in this movie like 19 years or 18 years before Dallas Buyers Club came out. He starred in this movie, and he played Prefontaine. Steve Prefontaine was a real person. He unfortunately died young and tragically. I believe he was killed by a drunk driver. He lived in Oregon, and he was an Olympic caliber runner who he originally started out to be a long distance runner. I mean, that's kind of, that was where the glory was. It was either in sprints, you're either the 100-yard dash man, and because we're talking about men's racing, or you were the long distance runner, which was like the other side of the coin, the other sport of kings, so to speak. And it just really told about your endurance if you could be a marathoner or, you know, that sort of runner. And Steve Prefontaine had some success, but not great success at being a long distance runner. He sort of ended up always kind of being in the middle of the pack. And he was looking for a way to change that dynamic, and he didn't know how. He wasn't interested in sprinting, and the long distance running wasn't working for him. And at some point, his coach started steering him towards maybe being a middle distance runner, which was something that the United States never paid attention to, middle distance runners. And that was to change, for Steve Prefontaine to change that focus took a lot of guts, because the endorsement money went to the sprinters or to the long distance runners. Nobody even knew. I mean, in terms of like the general, you know, popular focus, there was no focus on middle distance running. That was like something the Europeans did. Endorsement money is extremely important. But anyway, he decided to focus on that, and as it turned out, that's where his brilliance was. He was an amazing middle distance runner, and he just kept achieving, winning more and more races. And you get to the 1972 Olympics, and he was on the U.S. team to compete in the 1972 Olympics and went to the Olympics in Munich, Germany. We know what happened there. The Olympics were ruined by a terrorist attack. Israeli athletes were kidnapped, held hostage, eventually killed. And this happened before his race was scheduled to be, before Prefontaine's race was scheduled to be run. The crisis ended, and there was a big debate about whether to continue with the Olympics or not. There was a huge international debate about whether it made sense to even continue with the Olympics. And there was a decision made to, I believe, to go ahead, but there was, I mean, no one's heart was in it, and Steve Prefontaine did not do well at that point. So the idea was to come back in 1976 and to do the Olympics at that point. In the meantime, Steve Prefontaine was chasing his own demons. He was so upset about how he did. I think he was beat by a Finnish runner in Munich, and he was so upset. He really wanted a chance to a rematch, basically. And various events happened to keep to keep that from happening. Various rules about amateur athletics, and the end. You know, he was running for the University of Oregon, I think. So it's like NCAA sort of conflicting with the Olympic rules and all this other stuff, and it just created this huge morass, which made it very difficult for him to even qualify to be in the Olympics. And he ended up having sponsoring a race in Oregon of all of like the main internationally known middle distance runners. They came to Oregon, and he competed in that race, but he organized the race. And this again took a great deal of really courage, because he got no support from this except from his friends. It was basically sort of like a homegrown kind of race, except that there were these international world-renowned racers who came and had, you know, tea and Kool-Aid or pop or barbecue or whatever at Steve's house, and then they went out and ran these races. And the race turned out to be a huge success. And Steve Prefontaine did great. Unfortunately, it was like that night after that race is when he was killed on his way home. The other thing that was really awesome about Steve Prefontaine was that he became like the spokesman for how truly difficult it was for amateur athletes to make it in the Olympics world, in the world of international racing in the United States, because there was absolutely no financial support. People were expected to keep, you know, to hold 2 and 3 jobs and train. And then if they didn't win, then there was like the wrath of Khan fell down upon them, because, well, they only got a silver, or they only got a bronze, or, you know, they only did this, that, and the other thing. And the country did nothing to support this, very little to support these runners. And United States runners were competing against runners from other countries that had incredible national support. So Steve Prefontaine became a spokesman for the inequities of that, and the problems of NCAA rules and Olympic rules and the conflicts of them that made life truly difficult for Olympic athletes. So he was really an amazing person. I think this film told the story of Steve Prefontaine, I think, in a way that Prefontaine would have liked. It was the film itself doesn't have a lot of like glory. There aren't a lot of trumpet flourishes. It's not like Chariots of Fire, where everything is sort of bathed in this almost sort of hyper realistic heavenly glow, like they're running in heaven kind of thing. It wasn't like that at all. It was, Steve Prefontaine was very down to earth. It was the early 70s. It was the age of hippies. It was, you know, the age of pot smoking and not being, you know, hating the government and all of this stuff. And he was a pretty down to earth guy who just liked running, you know, but at the same time, he also was just very civically minded, which is why he undertook this whole issue of how amateur athletes were treated when they were trying to reach Olympic gold. And he was amazing at that. He was the person made for that task. And he really, really cared about not just about his race, but about all the races that athletes like him were trying to run. So that's what I found so fascinating. I think the film told the story in almost a documentary style. The film told his story very simply, without a lot of sort of, I don't know, grace notes or embellishments or any of that stuff. They just told the story of Steve Prefontaine very simply, how he got into running, why he stayed in running, his partnership with the man who actually ended up owning Nike, and his quest to, you know, be the best that he could be. So it was really interesting film from that standpoint. Jared Leto was just amazing, I think, as Steve Prefontaine. For one, he looks a lot like Steve Prefontaine did in real life. And Jared Leto has a runner's body, so he exemplified that whole sort of look, physique, which was very important. The supporting cast was also very good. R. Lee Emery played Bill Bowerman, who ended up being the creator of Nike. He created Nike shoes and created what eventually became the Nike Corporation. Ed O'Neill was also in this movie. Lindsay Krause played Elfriede Prefontaine, and who was Steve Prefontaine's wife. And a lot of other people in this movie who aren't very well known. Ryan Brewer, Lawrence Ballard, Adrian Amadeus, Kurtwood Smith. These aren't people who are well known today, but they all came together to create a really strong supporting cast for Steve Prefontaine. So anyway, that's why I like this movie. So I mean, is it the greatest movie that ever came out of 1997? I don't know. I think it's up there, and I think if people watched it today, it would still stand the test of time about telling the story of an athlete who loved the sport he was in, and he wasn't in it for the money. He wasn't in it for the glory. He was in it for love of the sport. And I think that story still, has a lot of resonance today.
Cool. Sounds good. Well, what about you, Steve? What film did you want to talk about next?
I think I'm gonna go from Prefontaine. Real quick. He wasn't killed by a drunk driver. He flipped his car while driving.
Okay, I thought it was a drunk driver.
While he was intoxicated.
Okay, well, he was drunk.
He was the drunk driver.
He was the drunk driver.
Also, one thing to kind of put his career in perspective a little bit, because I know a lot of people, you do sports and we can talk about, any athletes or anything, and we don't really give huge background. We give background to what they did, but not necessarily their exact accomplishments. In the NCAA, he never lost a race longer than 1 mile. And during his career, he won 120 out of 153 races he ran in.
Yeah, he was an amazing athlete.
Yeah, he was literally a standard for runners.
And I think he would have won the gold in the 1972 Olympics if that terrorist event had not occurred.
Right.
He would have won.
But I want to talk about a comedy to kind of bring it up just a little bit. And I'm going to talk about Liar Liar. In my opinion, one of Jim Carrey's probably top 5 movies. Maybe, I believe, 2 or 3. I think it's all around hilarious. Carrie Ellis is in the movie, and Henny, who's his secretary, is absolutely hilarious. Jennifer Tilly, who plays a terrible mother. Maura Tierney, we'll go with that. Plays his ex-wife in the movie. Jim Carrey plays a lawyer, and that really gives you as much as you need to know about the title being called Liar Liar.
Steve, before you go any further, Steve, I'd like to just point out that you remember Karen D, right?
Yeah.
She has this thing for lawyers that is very, very close to home.
Yeah.
Well, that's what she gets for saying allegedly.
Wow.
Just saying.
Shots fired.
Got a lot of lawyers in this family. Going out there.
Mm-hmm. And we know where you live.
Well, Greg could find out that information if he really wanted to, but either way, my area. But Jim Carrey plays, we'll say what the public would believe a stereotypical, over-the-top lawyer in this movie. We'll say that. And
nice save.
Yeah, I do my best. when working under pressure and the stare of Karen D. Uh, but he's most known for his elaborate lies in order to get his clients out of their cases, to win the sides that they're on, just outrageously. But he's also a compulsive liar at home, and that's where the story really kind of hits with people and dealing with families and lives like that. So it comes to one day where he's supposed to be at his kid's birthday party, and he ends up telling a lie because there's this case that's going to take him further, and he has to work on it. And by work on it, I mean sleeping with somebody that's in his office to help improve his position, hopefully. Uh, and his son decides to take it upon himself because it's his birthday. He's got the cake sitting in front of him. You blow out the candles and make a wish. And all everybody wants to believe in this one moment that maybe their luck will turn around. Well, this kid actually does it. He wishes that his dad couldn't lie. I believe for a day. Yes, for a day. And Jim Carrey wakes up in the middle of the night and he cannot lie. He cannot do what he does best. And it just leads to all sorts of hijinks and shenanigans. He actually is pulled in by one of his co-workers into an office meeting in which he's forced to tell each one of them off in their own separate ways, which I'm not going to spoil because it is absolutely the funniest scene of the whole movie. But he ends up getting rewarded and seen in a greater light because he's not being able to lie and telling the truth. And you can see where it slowly starts to dawn on him that he's been doing everything wrong through the whole movie, or in the past, and he needs to get moving forward. He's representing Jennifer Tilly, who is trying to get a divorce from her husband and is trying to get the kids and get all the money, even though she's the one who cheated on him. And he represents her to the best of his ability, even though she's not really someone he wants to be representing, and she's not helping him in any way, shape, form, or fashion during the entire case. But he manages to stumble on information which helps him finally seal the deal. But it's wholesome in the fact that as you get toward the end of the movie, he starts realizing everything with his son and how he needs to be there as a parent and to be there as a father, because if not, he's going to lose his kid. His wife his ex-wife is going to marry somebody else and move away and take the child with him. And it's a good wholesome story while also being a comedy. It's definitely one of Jim Carrey's better movies, and there's so many that he does a good job in. And it has a great serious tone to go along to contrast that comedy that you're getting through the whole movie.
Very cool. I remember seeing that movie a while back, obviously 1997. And
you remember seeing it 20 years ago?
I do. And I thought it was pretty good. And I'm kind of, as far as Jim Carrey is concerned, I used to watch him on a television series in Living Color. And before he got really, really popular and became more of a movie actor, certain films I'm not all that great in my opinion, but this was one of the better ones. So I agree with you, Steve. I kind of like this one.
I feel like this movie's comedy still stands up today as much as it did then.
Yeah, not a bad film. Well,
Greg.
Steve.
Greg.
Okay. I have a film here that makes me think about people who are, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess there's a lot of misses in this film. There are a lot of people who have certain jobs, certain personas, certain situations, certain class status in a lot of countries, but even here in the United States, we tend to be very smug sometimes when it comes to people in their circumstance. So the movie I want to talk about is Good Will Hunting. We're talking about Will Hunting, who's seems like the average guy, seems, doesn't have the greatest job in the world, but yet at the same time, he takes his job seriously and he does it well. Basically, he is a custodian at one of the most famous colleges, universities in the country, MIT. And, um, you know, obviously people, I won't even say look down on him, they look past him like he's not there. Um, and yet he lives a really, really modest life. So why would they make a whole movie about this guy? Come to find out, at this university, a teacher puts this crazy math problem. MIT, of course, is like math mecca, and puts this crazy math problem for his students to figure out. And Will wanders into the classroom, cleaning up the classroom. He sees the math problem on the board, and he's just trying to see if he could figure it out. And so the next day, when the teacher comes to the class and the students come to class, they look at the board and at the problem that they thought they would be able to come back and try to solve in the next class. It's already solved and it's correct, but no one knows who did it. So this is one of those movies where you find a person that you don't think has any ability, a person that's looked past because of his job and seeming stature. And you find out that there's more than what meets the eye. What is it? Not knowing a book by its cover, a very different situation. So basically, they find out somehow who the person is that solved the problem. And they're trying to understand and wonder why this person's not in class, because to solve these problems, you have to be a math whiz. And here's this guy clearly a math whiz. So one of the things about this movie is not just his ability as a mathlete, we'll say, but it also comes down to choices. Why did he make the choices that he made? So now they're trying to probe into his life even further by introducing him to a psychologist. So the essence of the movie, we go back and forth between the psychologist and the subject, and we find that there's a lot of education going on here, but it's not just the psychologist helping and trying to help the life essence of this young man, but we also find that this young man is teaching the psychologist some things too. We have a lot of life lessons out there. We have a lot of things that, make us similar in so many ways, and yet they're ignored. So this is one of those underdog kind of films that get you to understand that just because you may do this type of thing, just because your life is going in this direction, it doesn't mean that you're any less a person. It doesn't mean that the direction that you're going is totally wrong, but maybe you need some help along the way. And even the psychologist in this film is not a perfect person. And you find that there's a lot of understanding, a lot of deep thought, and a lot of likeness in this film between these characters in the movie. So in this movie, we have Matt Damon, we have Ben Affleck, and this is in their earlier years when they start making these movies and people are starting to take notice. And we have Robin Williams, who's a superb actor, and the relationship between Robin Williams' character and Matt Damon's character in this film, between Will and Sean, and what comes of this movie. This is a kind of a coming of age movie. This is a movie of understanding and empathy, a movie of sacrifice, and a movie of sheer courage, really. So I think everybody should watch this movie. It's a really good movie. And Robin Williams and Matt Damon do a superb job in it. So what other film do you have for us? Unless you guys want to comment on this film. Did you guys get to see this?
I've seen Good Will Hunting. It was well after when the film came out in 1997. But this is an Oscar-winning movie, and more than, I mean, this movie made Ben Affleck and Matt Damon stars, and they are stars today because of this film. They became Oscar winners extremely early in their career, not because of their acting, but because of their writing. They both wrote the screenplay for Good Will Hunting. In 1998, it was nominated for Best Picture, didn't win, but it was nominated. And Robin Williams did win the following year for Best Actor in a Supporting Role for Good Will Hunting. So this movie came out relatively late in 1997, which is why it was considered for the 1998 Academy Awards and not the 97 ones. But it's considered a really good movie. It was relatively popular, but just also considered a very well done film, very well written, and surprising that people so young could write such vivid characters. But they're based, I think, these characters were in a lot of ways based on their own sort of lives too. The movie was set in Boston, and there's there are very strong class distinctions that are played up in Boston between the elite of Harvard and MIT and the Southies, who are just kind of like hanging out in bars and eating clam chowder and just trying to make a living. So some of that, I think, was going on too.
Matt Damon actually started writing the script as a final assignment for his playwright class at Harvard. So he was finishing school, and this was just something, it was something he intended to follow through with, but it was just an assignment. It was just something that he was trying to turn in to, make sure he got the grade and pass the class. And it was actually, it wasn't the story that we got originally. It was more of a thriller style movie instead of a drama. And actually, Rob Reiner told them to get rid of the thriller aspect and make it more about Will Hunting and the psychologists of the movie, which is what we got and what came to be such an excellent movie.
So much more memorable because of that shift then.
Right.
Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate your extension and your giving for the movie. It's just a really good film, and I think I would implore everybody to watch this movie. It's
everybody?
It's an education within itself. It truly is.
Well, you don't have to beg. We'll watch it.
I've seen it.
Well, I've seen it, but I'll watch it again if you're going to implore me.
I'm talking about the viewing audience.
Oh, okay.
The people that matter.
Oh, the person who's listening to our podcast, right?
The people, the audience.
Wow, look at the time. I guess it's time for me to mention my next film, huh, Greg? Well, we still have a show to do. Okay, so my next film is a film called Eve's Bayou, and came out in 1997, and it has been one of my all-time favorite films for the last 20 years, ever since it came out, for so many reasons. One, a woman directed this movie, Kasi Lemmons. She is married to Vondie Curtis Hall, who's also relatively well known as an actor, more as a character actor these days. He was in Daredevil. In the first season, he played the reporter who kept investigating Vincent D'Onofrio's character. That was Vondie Curtis Hall. Anyway, so Kasi Lemmons directed Eve's Bayou. She wrote the screenplay for Eve's Bayou. And the cast of this particular movie, it's kind of an independent movie. It was definitely an indie type movie. And in fact, it won the Independent Spirit Award when those awards came out. And what was I going to say? It's an independent movie, so it was kind of a small film, but it was the kind of film that caught people's attention. It was set in 1960s Louisiana, and it's about this family who seems to lead a pretty idyllic existence. There's a doctor and his lovely wife and their 2 children, and they're wealthy, and they're in Louisiana where it's always warm and it's gorgeous, and but it's like, why doesn't this picture add up? Because the movie starts out with Eve talking about this movie from her perspective, talking about what happens in the movie from her perspective. And she's going to be telling a story where somehow her little girl life gets turned upside down because of what happens in this family. Other people in the cast, well, one of my favorite people in the cast was Diahann Carroll, who plays sort of like a witch who practices a lot of magic, and she doesn't seem to have very good intentions. And another one of my favorite actresses is Debbie Morgan, who plays the aunt of the girls. Lynn Whitfield plays the wife of the doctor, and guess who the doctor is?
Samuel L. Jackson.
Samuel L. Jackson. And that's another reason why I love this movie, because Samuel L. Jackson plays a doctor who is a good man who's extremely flawed. He's very devoted to his patients. He's a devoted family man, but he's also the worst womanizer this side of the Mississippi. And he just doesn't know how to not be a womanizer. And that creates major problems. And his wife, who's played by Lynn Whitfield, looks the other way. I mean, she knows he's a womanizer, but he's like the womanizer who always comes back home, I guess. And, doctors aren't exactly a dime a dozen. So, once you marry a doctor, you got to keep them. So there's especially in the 1960s, all of that's kind of going on. The movie sort of begins because Eve, who is like, her father dotes on her, also dotes on her sister too, who's older, but her sister seems kind of hostile and just very willful and very rebellious. And Eve is just very much in the family cocoon. She's very much invested in the family, but she sees her father in a liaison with another woman during a party that their family's having at their house. She sees that, and she's shattered by that. But the father makes a deal with her and says, please don't say anything. If you promise not to say anything, then, I'll let you, I'll basically let you do whatever you want. And so they make that deal. But of course, secrets will out. Debbie Morgan's character was the aunt who I was just fascinated by her, because she would talk to the girls like she was talking to adults. She would just have these really frank conversations about her love life or her lack of love life, or, just how hard it was to be in Louisiana and put up with all this family crap and all this other stuff. And I'm like, why are you saying this to children? I would never say this to a child, but she did. So that was kind of crazy. And Diahann Carroll was just creepy, sort of like, psychic, witchy type woman, witchy woman type person. And that was really interesting to see for me, because, she cut her teeth on being very, very proper, very educated, very well spoken, very, grounded type characters. Julia, or, Dynasty, or the other I mean, well-bred or well-done just very well-bred characters. And this woman in Eve's Bayou is nothing like that at all. There's not even the slightest resemblance. So to me, that really shows her chops as an actor. I mean, I've always thought she was a great actor, but this just exemplified that. And I just love Samuel Jackson playing this actually good-hearted man. And you don't see him playing, I mean, you see him playing basically decent people, but they're not the kind of people that you sit down and talk to. They're not warm and fuzzy. He played the romantic lead, and he doesn't usually play the romantic lead. And these days, he's usually like a foil for a super character, the head of some, superhero organization or something like that, but he's not playing the romantic lead in anything. But in this movie, he does. So I love that. I love that the cinematographer for this movie was a woman, because Louisiana, New Orleans, and just the Deep South, just the atmosphere of the Deep South was as much a character in this movie as any of the people. And I wish that Kasi Lemmons wrote more, was writing more and directed more. This was her first feature film, and she directed with a sure hand. And a number of critics cited Eve's Bayou as the best movie of 1997. And for a first-time director, that's pretty damn good. She pulled it off. Samuel Jackson was a producer in this movie, and I'm sure his gravitas in the industry helped get this movie made, but it was Kasi Lemmons' movie to helm, and she did, I think, a fabulous job. And the acting was just pristine. So that's why it's one of my favorite movies. And I just love the way in which it shows well-rounded characters who happen to be African American. These are people who have family problems or ethics problems or growing up problems or whatever. They're universal problems that lots of families have, but we don't often see the families this color having those problems. And in this movie, they do. They're extremely human, extremely well-rounded characters. So I love this movie.
Sounds really good.
Yeah, I've seen it too. It's actually a really good movie. So yeah, thanks, Karen.
Awesome.
So Steve, what else you got?
I got a murder mystery set in Washington, D.C. Takes place in the White House.
Ooh, I'm telling you.
The movie's called Murder at 1600, which is, of course, the reasoning behind that is because the murder takes place at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, which is where the White House is located. It stars
still
at the moment, right now. Look it up, Google it.
Currently.
The movie stars Wesley Snipes, Alan Alda, Diane Lane, Dennis Miller, like I said earlier, who was really popular at the time, TV shows, other movies. He did a great job with what he had to work with, which was not much, honestly, in my opinion. The movie starts off with Wesley Snipes in his apartment house, which is actually his apartment area is waiting to be demolished in favor of a parking lot that they want to build, which honestly goes with the times because that's still happening today. But he's trying to get information done, and he's trying to figure out who he's got to talk to try to make this not happen, because him being a homicide detective, the people in the tenants in this housing apartment are looking to him for help in order to make this not happen, because he's the cops. He's supposed to help people. When he gets the call that there's been a murder at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and even he has to ask a second time, like, I'm sorry, where did you say that was?
Right.
he shows up at the White House and he meets the actor's name is Dan Benzali. He's been in a bunch of movies that he plays Nick Spikings, who is the Secret Service director, and he's not very fond of the idea of having this handled by anyone outside of the Secret Service, outside of the White House. But since this was a homicide in Washington D.C., he has Wesley Snipes' character has jurisdiction over it, which they have a lot of back and forth and a lot of really good back and forth through the whole movie. And he also meets Alan Alda, which is the National Security Advisor, and a Secret Service agent who's played by Diane Lane. You find out later that she was actually an Olympic gold class sharpshooter. That comes into play later in the movie. She's actually assigned by Spikings to watch Wesley Snipes, so you really get great character development between those two throughout the entire movie. They're the ones that this movie really focuses around. Wesley Snipes is very cautious of her, believing that she may do something to jeopardize his investigation. And he just wants to find out what happened, like any good homicide cop would want to do. The one thing about this movie is there's actually an international crisis that is actually going on at the exact same time. There are hostages being held by North Korea, and a bunch of people in the inner circle of the president are trying to get him to take action, to send in the military to get those hostages out. But he's trying desperately to find a way to not incite a second Korean War. And a lot of his inner circle believes that if he uses military action, it'll send a decisive message to North Korea's only ally in this movie at the time, China, which is a big deal for 1997 and during that period of time with North Korean communism and China backing in real life, backing North Korea in certain business dealings and stuff like that. So it really has a real world aspect in this movie. But the movie carries over, I believe, like a week of them trying to figure out and corners and trying to put together this murder which has been scattered into puzzle pieces, and every single scene, every single step is they're finding another piece and another piece, and you still don't know exactly who to trust and what's going on as the movie progresses. And that's where the great character development keeps coming into play with Wesley Snipes, with Diane Lane. They come to find out partial way through the movie that the president's son was in a romance with the intended victim, or the victim. And they actually corner him without the Secret Service's knowledge to try to get information out of him. And it's found out that the Secret Service has covered up an assault and battery charge for him. So you really start to see the underhanded dealings that have gone on within the White House through this movie. It's very well paced. There's no scene that doesn't have let's see, what's the word I want to use? A necessary amount of information in it. There's not really a wasted scene. There's not really a wasted conversation in the whole movie. Everything has a point. Everything really continues to move along through the whole movie, and it's really good. The ending is something that I believe, a lot of the audience would not see coming, of who it is that killed the woman in the White House, the reasoning behind it, and everything. And I feel like this is a good movie for 1997, especially with the Bill Clinton trial going on. People kind of are interested in seeing that animosity coming from the president.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole situation.
Yep.
Good film. One of my
It
favorites.
is a really good film. Great job by Wesley Snipes.
Yep. Diane Lane too. She's a good actress.
she is an astounding actress. The amount of stuff that she has been in, and the casting that she has been a part of is quite incredible. And Alan Alda, I'll always remember him as Hawkeye. I used to watch MASH with my mom when I was little, all the time.
Good movie, man. And yeah, I like all those actors. They're all pretty well established, but also very stellar in their own right. So yeah, good film, man. Good film. Who's next on it? Oh, it's me?
Yes,
it's you.
We're waiting for you.
In the kingdom of could be you. Okay, I won't get it. That was something we were talking about before the show, ladies and gentlemen. And they were making fun of me then, so I'm not gonna have them continue to make fun of me now.
No, we'll still make fun of you.
And just criminalize my childhood.
That's actually been an entire part of everything that we've ever done on the show.
Mm-hmm.
All right. With that being said, again, why don't I go to the next movie? My next movie that I watched was a really good movie and very suspenseful film, and that's in the film of The Game. And this stars Michael Douglas, Deborah Carr Unger, and Sean Penn. And in this film, Sean Penn and Michael Douglas are estranged. They're brothers. They had a very tragic thing happen in their youth, and it affected one brother more so than the other. And it really affected the older brother, Michael Douglas. And Michael Douglas lives his life like he's waiting for something tragic to happen in his life. And any business dealings that he has, and he's pretty wealthy, he's doing well, but there's always that air of things going to go wrong. So he does things to prevent things from going wrong, as opposed to truly living his life. And so his younger brother wants him to understand that life has a lot of nuances. Life has a lot of, corners and changes and turns, and they're not always good, but they're not always bad either. So he's trying to get him to understand that. So in this film, Michael Douglas is a really wealthy banker, and his brother kind of gets him to participate in a very mysterious kind of a quirky kind of game, and to give him something different in life. And so he has to do a lot of persuading to get Michael Douglas's character to actually get involved. But once he does that, Michael Douglas doesn't realize that his life is going to change forever. And the things that happen in this game takes him over the edge, or right to the edge of right and wrong and suspense and even murder. So with this going on, there's this game and there's all these players, and it gets to the point where now Michael Douglas is always looking over his shoulder. He doesn't know what's going on, and he thinks that all these horrible things are happening to him in this game. And the people that are surrounding him, he doesn't know who to trust. This thing gets so blown out of proportion that now he's thinking, why did I do this? This is just the most horrible thing. And he can't seem to get his mind straight. Now, I don't know about you, but when your life is whatever it is, whether it's good or bad, and then all these changes occur, it's going to make you, it seems like it would just make you go mad. And that's what's kind of happening here. He doesn't know if this is real or if it's part of the game. People coming at him all the time, people doing things that are so out of the ordinary, but yet at the same time, there's a sense of realism. So he doesn't know what to think. He doesn't know what's right, what's wrong. This is a crazy whirlwind of a movie. And all because your brother thinks you need to do something to liven up your life. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm sure he didn't think this had anything to do with it. And he's involved in crimes. He's involved in other people getting killed or other people getting hurt. And he doesn't know what to do. He can't stop it. It seems like it's never ending. He doesn't know where to turn, who to trust. This is a great film. And the ending is just as crazy and bizarre as the whole film. So I think this is one of the better films I've ever seen. And it's one of my favorite films to watch. I've seen it like 3 times. The Game with Michael Douglas, Deborah Kara Unger, and Sean Penn. You have got to see this film, especially if you like a film that's going to take you on a ride, because The Game takes you on a total ride. And you don't know where you can get off, and you can't seem to get off. Great film. What do you guys think? Any of you guys either see this film?
I've seen the film. I saw it when it came out in the movie theaters. And I liked it. I probably didn't like it as much as you did, just because films of that type just drive me crazy after a while. Like I want to get off the ride. I just find it interesting. It's like, gee, what have we learned? Don't ever tell your brother you're bored. Right. And just give him free rein to give you any kind of present his little mind cooks up, because you never know. It's like, oh my goodness, this is what you do when you're bored. No. I just a cake. We need to stop at cake.
Right.
Or,
Right. Right. And the way family members are, I mean, you're estranged from this guy, so you're not sure what he's capable of anyway. Mm-hmm. And so, with that being said, it's almost like a stranger gave you a gift. Now what?
Right.
He's a stranger.
Michael Douglas is really watchable in this film because you really feel for him. Oh, yeah. And this is, I think Michael Douglas what I'm trying to say is that the success in American cinema is almost always a double-edged sword. I think even more so for women than for men, but for the men too. Sometimes winning an Academy Award will just catapult you and you can just ride that wave for like 10, 15, 20 years. And sometimes it can kill your career, or your career can just stall or plateau for no apparent reason because you're an Academy Award winning whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And then there are iconic roles that you can inhabit that just sort of trail you. There's the ghost of that role that just follows you wherever you go. It's like you're stalked by that character. So it's really hard for people to see you as anything other than that character. And for Michael Douglas, that was Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, which had happened 10 years earlier. And he won the Academy Award for Wall Street, Best Actor, I believe. And he did brilliantly in that movie, but he's a really good actor anyway. So I think trying to find roles after that was a challenge for him. And this was really interesting because here he's playing like this really, this wealthy person who seemingly has it all, but he's also a victim. He has these sort of he has the typical problems that a typical person might have, and that they're not happy with their life. They're not happy with how the life is going. They don't know where their place is in the world, even though they've done all the right things. Even if you're not as wealthy as that character, you can feel for that situation because most people are probably in that position where they're not entirely happy with how their lives are going. They're still trying to find their place in the world. They're a little lost. Mm-hmm. And what happens when you're lost and somebody comes along with an answer? Well, you kind of suspend your disbelief and you go for it because it's like anything's got to be better than just being lost. And that's where we get started on this crazy ride. I think it's interesting that he took that character because you have like the embodiment of Gordon Gekko, except way human, just extremely human, and just, sort
vulnerable.
Of searching, vulnerable. Yeah, that's the right word. Vulnerable and searching for a sense of belonging and just wanting to feel alive and, just engaged, which is that's the sort of thing that transcends class and economics and all that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, good film. Good film. All right, Karen, what do you got next?
Not me, Steve.
Steve, what do you got next?
Steve. Steve.
No,
I got
is
a
it
movie.
Steve or is it me? No, it's me.
It's actually you, but
Oh, okay, then it's me. Sorry, I got confused. My last.
She figured since she was talking that she was already done.
I think that's right. You're right, Steve. It's called pushing it off on the other guy.
Look at the time. Anyway,
Pushing it off on the other guy.
My third and last film, one of my favorite films of 1997, and actually, let me correct that. I can't say this is one of my favorite films of 1997, but the idea of this film kind of gets it into that sort of rarefied category, just because I think if I don't pick this film up, nobody else is going to pick this film up. And I think this film had so much to offer, some of which wasn't realized. The film is called Love Jones. And it stars Larenz Tate, Nia Long, Isaiah Washington, Bill Bellamy is also in this movie. And I remember going to the movies to see this film, running to the movies to see this film, because this is a love story. It's not a comedy, it's a drama, but there are a lot of comedic elements. I mean, Bill Bellamy's a comedian, and I'm sure he said a lot of funny things in the movie. But it's basically just about a poet who gets involved with a photographer. He's a poet. She's Nia Long, Larenz Tate's character is a poet who's like really, making a name for himself in the literary scene. And Nia Long plays a photographer who does these really stunning photographs. And they sort of meet and they get involved, but they're both sort of questioning what the relationship is. Is this the beginning of incredibly amazing, long-lasting romantic relationship, or is this just sex, or is it, or should they just be friends, or should they get involved with other people? All this sort of angst, some of which is a little bit manufactured for my taste. But anyway, here's what I love about this movie. First and foremost, the point of the movie was that you had a majority African-American cast, and they were focused on romance, which was something that was very rare in 1997 and is still pretty freaking rare today. Primarily involved in romance. It's not about gangs. It's not about hip hop. It's not about poverty. It's not about the man or the welfare state or any of that crap. It's about these young people who are intelligent, they are articulate, they are motivated, they are intellectually gifted, they are artistic and creative and funny and engaging, but above all, intelligent and incredibly intelligent. And it's like, wow. And it's about these people who, their worlds collide, and do they fall in love or do they not fall in love? The other thing I love about this movie is that it was filmed in Chicago, on Chicago's South Side. And it's a part of Chicago that you don't see in movies very often. When Chicago's the character in the movie, it's either a baseball stadium, one of two, or it's a skyline, or it's maybe downtown, or it's Navy Pier. But it's not Hyde Park. It's not the South Side away from White Sox Stadium. It's not any of that, but that's what this movie focused on. So I love that. And I guess I kind of have a thing for these movies where the city is, the exterior becomes sort of a character too. And what Chicago does, Chicago has this reputation, well-deserved, I think, for being like a center for music and for literary creativity. I mean, some of the country's best writers come from Chicago or honed their craft in Chicago. I mean, Second City's in Chicago, Goodman Children's Theater's in Chicago. So they hone their craft in Chicago. they became best-selling authors in Chicago, that sort of thing. So Chicago deserves to be a character in this sort of setting. And I really like it that that Theodore Witcher, who wrote and directed the movie, chose Chicago as the setting. Could have easily made it New York, he could have made it LA, but I think it really works in Chicago. Where I mean, there's a great part of the movie that often gets cited in sort of the critics reviews, where the two main characters, Nia Long's character and Larenz Tate's character, have a debate about a quote, and he thinks it comes from Mozart, and she's like, no, I think you're thinking of George Bernard Shaw. And it's like having those sorts of discussions. These are people who play classical music, listen to classical music, but they also listen to jazz, and they listen to R&B. They have eclectic taste. And I guess that speaks to me, because I feel like I'm a person with eclectic taste. I listen to classical music. I listen to jazz. I like hip hop. I like R&B, and, you know, I like salsa, you know, and I'm reading the biography of Steve Jobs, but I also read tech journals. So, I mean, again, I have wide-ranging taste, and it was really a treat to me to see people on the screen who felt like people I knew and were people who were like me. So I really liked that. I thought the movie had some flaws. I think for intellectually gifted people, they sounded pretty street, which I didn't understand. Because it's like, no, that's not how, if you're really that focused on intellectual gifts, you're not that worried about how hip you sound. I think there was too much of an effort to make them sound hip. I also, the love story just left me a little wanting, simply because it was a little overwrought for a love story. It got extremely complicated. It didn't need to be that complicated. But just seeing these people on the screen was, to me, enough of a treat. It was nominated for the Audience Award and the Grand Jury Prize at the Sundance Film Festival that year. So it's a well-regarded film. Now, I also remember a lot of controversy about the casting of Larenz Tate in this movie. I mean, he was extremely young when this movie came out. And I do vividly remember the debate about whether he had enough maturity to carry the romantic lead of this movie, or was he just too young? Mm-hmm. I mean, he has a baby face, even with the mustache. So I could see, and there was just some concern about his acting ability too. Less concern about Nia Long's character, but a lot of concern about Larenz Tate's character. Anyway, it's a really interesting movie. I think it's really worth a watch, simply because it's still too rare. We're almost in, we're almost through the teens of the 21st century. And it's still really rare to see this type of movie that doesn't involve hip hop, that doesn't involve a gun, that doesn't involve robbing, that doesn't involve, thugging or any of the crap that Hollywood keeps associating too often with the African American experience. Just this notion that the African American experience is as varied and rich a tapestry as any other experience that people have that people of different classes or different ethnicities have in this country. We also have this extremely rich and varied experience. We too can be Republicans. We too, can, not really care about R&B music and much prefer classical music or opera. We too read poetry and write poetry and do photography. One of the greatest photographers in American history is an African-American man by the name of Gordon Parks. So, our stories are out there, but they don't get told often enough. This movie attempts to tell some of those stories. So that's why I want to talk about it in 1997. That's why I think it's worth a look today, because it's not something that you still don't see it often enough in 2017.
And very much the contrast of a movie that came out recently, which is Chirac. shows two
Oh
very different
God.
sides of Chicago and what Chicago is. Chicago is not just a situation where gangland violence occurs all the time. Um, this movie also shows that there are other aspects of the city of Chicago and people of this ilk that live there survive and thrive in the society there, because society is not one dimensional. No
Right.
society is one dimensional as much as people may think. And taking Chicago as a whole, we need to do that, take Chicago as a whole and not a
Mm-hmm.
segmented part of its existence, because it is a place of commerce. It is a place of diversity. It is a place of
It's a place of
wealth,
music and
music, education. There are so many schools of knowledge
dance.
in Chicago. As you alluded to before, creativity also thrives in the city of Chicago. So, there's always different aspects of anything, but Chicago is a great city. So yeah, real good, Karen. That was cool. So Steve, you have anything left before I
Uh,
jump on my last film?
I do have one left. Uh, it's a summer movie in 1997 that was actually called one of the best summer blockbusters of all time and one of the worst summer blockbusters of all time, literally on the same day by two different people.
All right.
The budget for the movie was 90 million and it earned more than 263 million worldwide, which for a movie at the time is very, very good. And nothing compared to Titanic, but it really stood on its own for power. It literally has two actors in the movie that I believe if you're studying or you want to be an actor, you need to study these people uh, as well as you possibly can. Gary Oldman and Ian Holm. Also, Bruce Willis, Mila Jovovich, Chris Tucker brings over the top comedy in here as soon as he hits the scene, and he does not stop through the entire movie, which is amazing. I'm talking about The Fifth Element, which for 1997, it's a movie that when I think of 1997, that's one of the first ones that comes to mind. Like a lot of people, Dante's Peak, um, L.A. Confidential, Titanic, the movies that we've talked about today are all things that people should see or people remember from '97. This one is my go-to movie. Whenever it's on TV, I have to watch it. Whenever I see it on the DVD case and see the DVD case on my shelf, I stare at it for at least 2 to 3 minutes before moving on to something else, or I'm picking that one up and putting it in.
Right.
But it's a classic sci-fi. It carries all the tones of the classic sci-fi movie. The Earth hero that's just a normal human being, the supporter or the love interest that's the alien from space, or how do I want to put this? We'll just say good looking alien from outer space in order to keep it pretty PG for YouTube. The priest that warns of an imminent demise coming to Earth. It's got everything that you want in a sci-fi movie. The movie actually starts in 1914, which when some aliens come down to Earth, and because World War One is right around the corner, and they're concerned, they decide that they're going to Earth to pick up a weapon from Egypt, from an Egyptian temple that's capable of defeating a great evil that appears every 5,000 years. So they come down, they get these 4 stones, they collect this sarcophagus, and they're leaving in order to just prevent anything from maybe happening with Germany slowly invading into Africa. Do you not remember this, Greg?
Yes, I do.
Oh, okay. You just had that face like, when did that happen? But they end up picking this, and they tell the priest from the secret order that's their human contact on Earth, that they're going to come back with the stones in time to stop the great evil. Okay, that was 1914. All right, now we're going to fast forward to 2263. Earth is just a tad bit different. You know, skyscrapers and apartments that stretch all the way into the upper parts of the clouds. Flying cars finally do exist. Let's get that out of the way. Taxi cab drivers are still a little rambunctious and different.
Now we know it's science fiction.
Right. Well, there you go, Karen. That's your one joke. I'm going to let that one slide.
I got more than one joke, Mr. Man.
But we're introduced to our great evil, which appears in deep space in the form of a gigantic fireball floating in space. That's black. It's a black fireball. And it destroys a bunch of Earth airships that are trying to attack it. The priest, which is part of the order that communicates with these aliens, is telling the president of the federated territories, which is basically all of Earth's countries have joined together, and there's one guy that everybody answers to, which it's kind of funny. It's tiny, and when you see the actor and you know who the actor is, Tiny's pretty funny to be calling him. It's not something I'd call him in person. But he informs the president that the great evil is coming and that there is a weapon that can stop it. They kind of brush him off to the side. Who cares about these rantings by an old priest from a religion that they don't even recognize on Earth? And then we meet Jean-Baptiste Emmanuel Zord, played by Gary Oldman, and played superbly by Gary Oldman with his quips, his one-liners, and he has a certain demeanor about him, which is, it's seemingly he's not trying to be serious, but everything he says is serious. He means exactly what he's saying, and you better do it or he's going to kill you. And he has been entrusted by this great evil to find the stones before the people, the priest, and the priest finds them and then forms the weapon, so so this great evil can destroy Earth. Well, ends up there's the ship that the aliens took the stones and the sarcophagus on. Ends up is flying back to Earth and is coming to get everything ready to deal with this great evil situation. It gets attacked on the way to Earth. And the only thing that survives is a severed hand clutching the control lever. That's it. But they're living. Yeah. But they're living cells, and in the future, they can reconstruct a body from any living cells, evidently. And that's what they do in New York City. They reconstruct this humanoid, which turns out is a woman, played by, and this is the first time we get to see Mila, and who takes the name Lilu. I think it was from a sign, or no. It was from a plate on ad in the back of the taxi. Well, she ends up freaking out because she's literally just been recreated from death, and she ends up leaving the laboratory out of a window, ends up falling off of this skyscraper and falls straight through the roof of a taxi.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we meet Bruce Willis, who is playing Corbin Dallas. He's a former major in the Special Forces who has gotten out of the military and is just trying to live a normal life, which he has an extremely hard time doing. Everything goes from there. Lilu ends up kind of passing out during an insane taxi ride with Bruce Willis trying to escape the cops. Ends up he's taking the girl to Ian Holmes' character Cornelius, and Cornelius tells him of all the things that are happening and all of this stuff. Well, Cornelius also learns that there is an alien opera singer that has been entrusted with this, with the stones, and that he's going to go meet her, and he's going to steal Corbin Dallas's IDs in order to go do it. Well, ends up the military finally starts to believe the priest, so they they get Bruce Willis's character reinstated and send him to a planet called Florestan. It's a luxury cruise planet, and they end up getting on a luxury cruiser. There's all sorts of antics that kind of go on in between this point. It's very hilarious getting from point to point to point. The one-liners are pretty funny. The interaction between Leeloo and Corbin is absolutely hilarious because she is in no way, shape, form, or fashion in any understanding of how Earthlings act or how human beings do anything. And Bruce Willis trying to control her is very funny for the first part of the film. When they get to the cruise liner, we meet Ruby Rod, played by Chris Tucker.
I thought you were wondering when you're going to get to that point.
Oh my God. Arguably the best character in the whole movie.
Hilarious.
He is 100% in his role, in his character, completely devoted from the first scene you see him in to the last scene you see him in. I feel like he does an amazing job. I feel like it's of everything Chris Tucker has done, this is like right there at the top of his roles, even better than his roles in the Rush Hour films.
I think so.
Which were superb, in my opinion.
Yeah, he does a really good job in this film.
And then some antics ensue from there. There's a great scene with Plava Laguna. Plava Laguna, I believe is the opera singer's name. I'm probably butchering the crap out of that.
That's okay.
There's a great scene with her doing her opera on stage right before she is supposed to meet Bruce Willis in order to exchange the stones to him. And it's literally splitting between her singing and Leeloo having a fight scene with these aliens. And the choreography between the music and the fight scene and the emotion that actually comes out from the singing and translate through the punching in the fight scene is very well done. And it's very well shot. And I feel like they flip back and forth at the perfect times for the scene to actually work. And then then the rest of the aliens attack the rest of the ship. Dallas ends up getting the stones from Plava Laguna. And then they have to get off the ship while they're being hunted by these aliens. And Gary Oldman's character Zorg comes in and is trying to find the stones as well. And, you know, he gets his comeuppance in this movie, in the ending scene for the cruise in the movie. And then they're headed back to Earth. I'm not going to really say any more. You kind of know how sci-fi films go.
I thought you had said everything there was to say.
You know what? Honestly, it starts really cracking into like emotional scenes after this. Just a couple of them, but they do a real good job of bringing the comedy down, bringing the action down, and really focusing on this small little drama points in the movie while they're on their way to Earth to go to the temple to try to activate and save the Earth. The scene with them activating the stones is funny as well, of them trying to figure out how to do it. From point A to point B, this is a complete movie, start to finish. It is very standalone. You don't need anything extra. I'm so glad they never did a sequel or a prequel or anything in between dealing with this movie franchise, because this is one that you could have ruined the way people think about this movie. And I feel like all the movies that we're talking about today are really standing the test of time. And from seeing them in 1997 to seeing them now in 2017, they're still just as good and they're still just as represented, even though it's from the past, but they have life representation in today as well.
Right.
Cool. Good movie. It was a fun movie.
It is a fun movie from start to finish.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, to pull up the rear and close this session of the films, my last film is a film with Harrison Ford called Air Force One.
Oh, love that.
Yay, Gary Oldman.
Harrison Ford plays the President of the United States, and he's an ex-military man, and he's very proud but very fair individual. And there's a crisis in Russia where a political prisoner has been taken, and rightfully so, and putting a dictator who was credited with the mass murder of over 200,000 people. So this movie stars, of course, Harrison Ford, and as Steve alluded momentarily, a moment ago, Gary Oldman again rears his very cool acting chops, and then also a very good cast of characters. We have Glenn Close, who plays the vice president.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and Wendy, I'm going to probably kill her name, Crewson, Crewson, Crewson. She plays, yeah, she plays the president's wife, and does a very good job of it in this film. So basically, the essence of what's going on is the United States has always had this very straightforward and very strong feeling with regard to terrorism. And terrorism is not something that is taken lightly, but it is also a situation where we do not cave into terrorist threats and or demands. We do not negotiate with terrorists. That is an ongoing thing here in the United States. Well, in this situation, the terrorists are saying, oh, yes, you will. And how they do it is they actually find a way to hijack Air Force One, the president's plane that has all these Marines and Navy SEALs and CIA and Secret Service people all over the place, and yet somehow Air Force One gets hijacked. And Gary Oldman is one of the hijackers. So basically there's this political prisoner, and they're going to hijack this plane to get the president, to find a way to make the president help them get back their fearless leader. The one small problem is that Harrison Ford doesn't negotiate with terrorism, with terrorists, not even on the plane that he's on. He's not negotiating with terrorists.
That's kind of a problem.
And one of the major problems in the film is early on is how do the hijackers, they had it all figured out, get on the plane as news press with press passes, and then someone early on puts weapons on the plane, and then they get the weapons that are already on the plane. So you got to remember, this is Air Force One. You got Navy guys, Marines, Secret Service, CIA, everybody's on the board. So they've got an arsenal on this plane. So you don't have to really smuggle a whole bunch on there. It's already on there.
Right, right.
So it's like, you know, easiest thing, easiest pie.
That's, yeah.
So they find hostages, get hostages in a small place, but the president is nowhere to be found. So the main person they want to talk to, the main person they're trying to get to negotiate getting this terrorist dictator out of prison, you can't even find him. Well, obviously we find out that there are a lot of secret places and nicks and crannies on Air Force One that people weren't aware of. And the president is behind the scenes trying to figure out, what am I going to do? And he has a military mind. So, and the one other thing that's the biggest deal in this movie is they interrupted Notre Dame. And,
well, that's a hanging offense.
You do not interrupt Notre Dame and Michigan in a football game.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, terrorism has nothing to do with it. You pissed off the president.
Right. Well,
football game, okay?
These crooks
How
have no
dare
idea what
you.
they're doing, or they never would have interrupted. They would have waited till after the game was over.
At least waited, but no, no. And even killing William Massey on this plane doesn't matter because the president's like, look, you interrupted the game.
Right.
That's an offense in itself.
Hanging
And
the
so
fence.
handily, the president's going around doing different things in this plane with his abilities, and he's just getting rid of terrorists left and right. So finally, the terrorist has to do the cowardice thing and hold his family hostage. Well, you do not hold the president's family hostage.
You don't hold Harrison Ford's family hostage.
You do not. This is the president of the United States, former military. He's got medals up the wazoo. You do not do this. And somehow they made this movie actually be kind of cool. And so Harrison Ford tries to come to the rescue of everyone, but he does get captured at some point. And so I'm not going to, tell you everything that happens in the film, but it plays so interestingly throughout this film. Hijackers figured they got it all figured out. They have a plan. The plan is in action. They're, doing everything that they think is right. And somehow, some way, it comes down to the term from, from Mice and Men? The best laid plans of Mice and Men. Well, and they didn't put in, but they should have, and terrorists.
Right, often go astray.
Often go astray. This is actually a kind of interesting movie. It's a thrill-packed film. I'm not going to say it's the greatest movie of 1997, but it was a lot of fun.
It's a roller coaster ride for sure.
Definitely.
And I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did too. And it was really a lot of fun to watch. And I think Harrison Ford is just a really good actor. And so he plays the president. His reactions, his facial expressions are paramount, and they're poignant in this movie. So Air Force One, I think everybody should see it, especially, again, if you want another thrill ride as far as films go. And especially at a time, it seems like it always comes at a time where we want to have, in our true political forms, we're not always sure what's going on and not necessarily very confident in the president. He puts that confidence right back in there and helps that situation out. And Bill Clinton didn't know how much help he was getting from Harrison Ford in Air Force One.
That's for sure.
But it is a cool ride. And again, Gary Oldman is the man. I love that dude as an actor. Very good actor. And he does a great job here as the primary terrorist, trying to get the president to make that call.
Right.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, our show is coming to an end.
Hey, before we get out, can I just do one thing? Can I just interject one thing before we get out?
I mean, we're about to get off the air, Karen. Are you sure you want to do that?
Yeah, I do. Oh,
Okay.
Stop with the sign.
Karen, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Greg and Steve. No, I think we would be remiss in not mentioning some of the other, because what we focused on were our favorite films of 1997, not necessarily the best or the most popular films of 1997, but I would like to just give an idea of what kinds of films were out there in 1997 besides the ones that we mentioned. Besides the ones that we talked about. Remember, Titanic was the top grossing film of 1997. Men in Black came out that year. Selena, The Devil's Advocate, Batman and Robin, Life is Beautiful.
We don't talk about that movie.
Oh, Life is Beautiful came out. Boogie Nights, LA Confidential, Alien Resurrection, Jackie Brown, The Lost World of Jurassic Park. Let me see. As Good as It Gets. It was a very well-regarded film. I Know What You Did Last Summer. Contact. Amistad Face Off, which was one of my favorite. I didn't talk about it, but I really like that film with John Travolta. Con Air.
Wag the Dog.
The Full Monty. Yep. Wag the Dog. My Best Friend's Wedding, which is one of my favorite Julia Roberts films. Let me see. And besides that, G.I. Jane, and there was one other film that I wanted to mention.
Well, while you mentioning that, I did you mention The Apostle with Robert Duvall?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't.
That's a good one.
The Sweet Hereafter, Soul Food, also good. Chasing Amy, The Boxer with Daniel Day-Lewis, and let me see. And I think Kiss the Girls, that was one that I also wanted to mention as one that came out, as well as Bean, which was British film, but just very funny. And Absolute Power, another White House centric movie, but this one with Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman. So those are just some of
film. Another Matt Damon film too. Rainmaker came out then, didn't it?
I don't have that, but maybe it did, but I'm not seeing that in my list. But The Peacemaker came out in 1997 with George Clooney. So
and the Rainmaker with Matt Damon, also 1997.
Okay. So that's I just wanted to do like a quick overview of other movies, like the popular and, sort of front of mind movies that were percolating in 1997, in addition to our favorite movies that we talked about tonight.
I appreciate that, Karen, and I apologize for just kind of jumping out there. We were just kind of running like the saber-toothed tiger long in the tooth here, but
yes,
very important to mention all those films, and there's so many more. 1997 looked like it was a really good year for film. We've been pretty lucky in many of these decades that we've been able to cover so far, that the films are standing up to, I don't know, maybe our expectations, but it's clearly showing us that there are some good films being made a long time ago, even before the end of the millennium. So yeah, very good stuff. So I guess we're getting into that next decade, which was 2007, into the new millennium, and we'll be talking about that within the next few weeks, and trying to find some really good films for you guys to watch. So hopefully the films that we discussed tonight will get you to at least take a look and see some really good films out there, and revel in the fact that 1997 was not just almost the end of a millennium, but also a good time to watch movies. Well, thanks to everybody out there, and please come visit us again here at A Real Point of View on our YouTube channel, and also check out our archives on Blog Talk Radio under A Real Point of View. And any last words before we get out of here, you guys?
Get out of here, you knucklehead.
Okay.
There's a lot of movies coming out this year that are expected to be really good and are catching the attention of everybody. Be sure to go out to your local theater.
That's right. I'm hearing good things about Spider-Man, hearing good things about Planet of the Apes.
I'm in the Dark Tower.
Yeah, Dark Tower, definitely.
Things about Wonder Woman.
Yeah, Wonder Woman was really good.
Well, okay, whoa. Wonder Woman was okay, but it was not. I was ready for like the greatest movie of all time, and I was like, it was okay, it was fine, but it wasn't like setting the world on fire as far as I was concerned.
All right, well, that's one critic's opinion. That's what we're here for, to give you our opinions.
Not gonna say anything. Keeping it to myself. We're good.
Okay. Well, hey.
Otherwise, we'll be here for another hour.
I'm actually interested, because we were talking about Gary Oldman. I'm interested in Darkest Hour.
Oh yeah.
Where he plays Winston Churchill.
Yeah, crazy. Now that's going to be interesting. So many people have been doing that lately. I think Church has kind of been out there in the last 5 years about 5 times. But hey, somebody's got to get it right, right?
Right.
All right. So thanks again, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging out with us here at A Real Point of View. Have a wonderful night. Get out to see the movies. And if you can't get out, stream it on television. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.
Night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I repeat everything Steve says.